And so Bob Sandine is technically hosting this program for us, the History Hangout, and I'm Jessica. I'm the director of the Historical Society. So we're just going to kind of kick off here with just a little bit of background for those of you who aren't familiar, which actually might just be Ruth. She's new. So this is the crazy radar, as you're looking at here on the screen, as it came across the county and the area. It's very colorful, a little scary looking. This is what we were talking about right before everybody kind of joined. We were talking about the tornado, like the impact area and what it was. So in the upper corner, you can see that's how that scooted across southern Minnesota. And so the lines and little dots are all separate tornadoes. So there were several tornadoes that happened this day. And so you can see where it came across, especially down there by Cottonwood County. And that one went up through Cortland. Then there was that small break. And then the one that started by Nicollet and went up and through is the one that came through St. Peter. And the city of St. Peter map down there, you can see the impact area where that came across there over by Nob Hill, Pine Point area, came across over Gustavus, you can see right in the middle, and then basically headed out towards us, although we weren't really affected out here. There was very little damage to this area. And it all depended on what side of the spin you were on this was one of the big things, how tornadoes take one place and they damage the neighbor's house, hardly at all. And it all depended on what side of the back spin or the front spin of the tornado you were on, how it impacted you. So that was one of the big pieces. But this is that trajectory that really, really took. And you'll see, if you've seen photos and if you were here, you know that it was really devastating.
Yeah.
So, Peggy, you were where? You were outside of town? I see Peggy's muted. So Kate, you were at Nob Hill still, where you are now?
Yes.
Okay.
So just off 99.
Just off 99.
Did you have much damage?
My whole neighborhood was wiped out. My house was the only one that was still standing, a little off center a bit, but the reason that the FEMA people told me was because my house was built with plaster and lath and long nails, and I didn't have eaves. There wasn't really an overhang on the roof, so the tornado didn't get purchased underneath to take the roof off, and then everything else goes.
Were you in that cluster of homes just west of Resurrection Cemetery?
Correct.
Yeah. I know, looking at the photos, that area was hit really hard. I should mention that I've made a tremendous effort over the years to gather as many photos as I can, and I'm still encouraging people to share photos with the Historical Society. We've digitized hundreds of them. And
thousands.
Yeah, really.
There are thousands of digital photos, which is awesome.
Yeah. But I mean, just for the 1998 tornado, we've digitized hundreds of them. And I took quite a few of them myself, but I also borrowed a set of aerial photos that were taken the morning after the tornado. And those things are absolutely amazing because they cover virtually all parts of the St. Peter area that were affected by the tornado, starting from where Kate lives, going all the way across town and out onto Old Minnesota Avenue, going north out of St. Peter toward the museum. But as Jessica mentioned, the museum building was not affected by the tornado.
And you can see some of those if you guys are on Facebook. We've shared some of those. So those were taken by helicopter by the State Patrol. So they took the State Patrol guys up, and engineers, and some of them from those law enforcement, FEMA and all of that. There's different ones that went up, but you can see them, and they're massive. So there's large chunks of town. And if you can find a pinpoint, like if you know, like, oh, hey, like that was where the Catholic Church was, you can kind of tell, but otherwise you really have to read the labels on those. It's kind of crazy, but there's several of them there. And if you're curious if your place or something is on one, I'm sure we can show you a copy of them. We blew
Yeah.
some of them up for the exhibit that we did. And they're just, it's crazy. You've got to like orient yourself just right so you can figure out where you are in town.
Yeah, the set of aerial photos that I had borrowed some years later, I was able to convince somebody to donate a set. So the museum has a set of those in its collection, and those have been digitized. And we have them logged in our computer system that contains the descriptions for each photo in our collection that we've been able to process on the computer software. And it's pretty amazing looking at those images.
I think when we had the exhibit up at the treaty site, that was, I saw an aerial from my area. That was the first time I'd seen that, and that was awesome. Quite honestly, I had a couple pictures that I brought down to loan and have digitized. But Peggy, we were so busy trying to clean up. There was no time to. No, that's not me. Anyway, there were
He's
so.
Nob Hill.
Then the blue house right there on the bottom right corner, that's my house. The rest of it is my neighborhood.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Windows gone and all that kind of stuff. But we were so busy trying to clean up and get trees out of there and all that kind of stuff that taking pictures was not a priority. Yeah, yeah, that's a great picture.
We went out to Resurrection Cemetery where family members are buried, and we came in off of 99 rather than off of Jefferson. And the first thing we noticed, of course, was the trees, like Kate mentioned. I don't think there was a tree left standing in Resurrection Cemetery, and that had been just full of trees all over the place. And they were just all piled up and knocked over. It was just a mess.
So. My mother, I had called because I was working at Security Hospital, and so I wasn't able to go home till 10 o'clock. Well, little did I know that my place was damaged and I couldn't get home. I couldn't go this way. I thought I'd come in the other way because there were power lines across the road. So I went to my boyfriend's place in North Mankato, and he wasn't there. And I thought, well, where the heck is he at? Because he had no telephone communication. And he had gone out to find out what had happened at my place and got as far as they could before the power lines stopped them. And they walked in, and he walked right into a power line as it had crossed my driveway. And it was getting dark when they were out there, and thank God it was dead. But he came back a little bit later with my dog. And so I was able to call my mother, who said, take pictures. So I thought to grab a camera and get some pictures, which I'm glad I did. Not a lot from when we first got there because there was so much to do. And I think it was probably 10 days before I ever got into town to see what had happened there.
I know, and we had in that whole neighborhood, my house was sort of standing, so people were from the neighborhood, and there were, it was a Sunday evening. There weren't a lot of people there, but they came to my house, and then the crew kind of spread out and like made sure all the gas, the LP tanks were turned off and stuff. But in that picture of the house, of my house, you can see in the very bottom corner, there's my LP tank. And there's an orange car on top of my LP tank that had been out in the ditch beforehand advertised for sale. And way down in the very corner, you can see that spotty orange. That's the car that landed from the ditch on my LP tank. And we were just so lucky, and you couldn't get in and out because there was a power line there. And then I tried to take a couple of the neighbors into town to find the husband, the dad. This is the Vavricks. And he, we couldn't get into town this way, and we couldn't get into town this way, and we couldn't get into town this way. And so finally I dropped her off at the Hoffman Center. It was terrible. I had no idea from the top of our hill what had happened in St. Peter. I had no clue.
And I was working with people that lived in town. In fact, one lived at the trailer court on the far north side. And somehow we had enough staff that he could leave to check on his place. And somehow he got to his place. And of course, usually you think about trailer parks, mobile home parks, and they're usually the first things that go in a tornado. And I don't think hardly any of ours in town were struck. And somehow he got to go and check on his place, and the other gal that was working with us, her place, and they were fine. And like I said, little did I know I'd be the one that got hit. But
Yeah, I can't think of damage in any of the trailer courts. I can think of 3 trailer courts in St. Peter, and I don't recall damage to any of them. I did want to say too that we do have images from the 1998 tornado on the Minnesota Reflections website. And that can easily be searched by going to the Nicola County Historical Society's section of the Minnesota Reflections website, then doing a keyword search for tornado. You'll also get some from the 1924 tornado, but most of them will be the 1998 tornado. The other thing that the museum has is a considerable collection of video that was taken in 1998 after the tornado. I was able to contact an awful lot of people and get copies of video taken by WCCO, and I'm trying to remember, I think.
Year 11.
Yeah, I was going to say Carry 11, if I recall. Also, the natural gas company. Roger Schob was working for the gas company at the time, and he happened to mention one day that the gas company had some excellent footage. And that's some of the best footage that I've seen. And then, let's see, there are some individuals in town too that also loaned us a video. Then we transferred it from VCR to DVD. So we've got a lot of DVDs full of video. I think we got one from Gustavus as well, which is quite good. So we got a lot of coverage of the tornado, plus mountains of newspaper coverage, not only from the St. Peter Herald, which did some excellent coverage, but of course the Mankato Free Press, then the Twin Cities area newspapers, and some other odds and ends newspapers from around the state. So,
well, and keeping it local too, we were pretty fortunate that Bruce Davis donated his collection of interviews and stories that he did on the radio. I mean, he was a lifeline to the outside world at that point, and we've got like something like 6. He's got 6 DVDs or CDs of his time on the radio that he shared, and it's just incredible. He just, even just to tell the time, not every, if you had an analog clock that worked, super, but some people just needed that connection to know what was going on, and so his stuff's really good too.
Bruce brought in a bunch of cassette tapes that he said were recordings concerning the tornado, and Bruce himself had a pretty harrowing experience. I didn't realize there was a basement at KRBI, but he said that he just barely made it down there in time. And he's an interesting guy to talk to about the tornado. He can tell you quite a bit. So I see the the image that Jessica has put on the screen here is a particularly good one. The lower left has the Catholic Church that was destroyed. That's where the St. Peter Community Center is located now. The one to the right of that shows what remained of the two schools. The one to the left, which is only partially visible, was the old 1870s school. And that was in use as a home of the arts and heritage people in 1998. It had been newly restored. It was absolutely beautiful inside, the beautiful woodwork and everything. Then the larger of the two structures that are visible was the second St. Peter High School. And after the next high school was built along Lincoln Drive or in Capitol Drive area, this became a grade school, and I attended classes there. And later it became the community center, and the historical society was in the northeast corner on the top floor, which happened to be my old sixth grade classroom. The image that Jessica has shown now is the old 1870 school building built as St. Peter's first high school.
The one that we're still missing the bell from.
Yeah, yeah.
If you guys get a chance, if you didn't, Eileen Holes wrote an awesome newsletter article on all of the missing bells, and it started with the story about this particular missing bell, and she discovered that there are all kinds of missing bells. So if you get a chance, we did discover one of the mysteries was solved, but and I can maybe share that too as we're getting closer to the anniversary date. But it was a really fun story about the missing bells.
Yeah, that's a close-up of the two schools. You can barely see the 1870 school on the left side of this image. Then dominating the image primarily in the lower right is the second high school. In this particular image, if you hold this one for a second, Jessica, if you go to the corner toward the lower right of this image, you'll see a broken window on the top floor. That's the area where the Nicola County Historical Society had been until just a few years prior to the tornado. Had they remained in that site, they would have lost everything. And that was my old sixth grade classroom right there. So that shot has particular interest to me. This is a view inside that second high school where the community center and historical society later went in. You can see some of the lockers. This apparently was on the upper floor. This looks like there's a stairway going down in the distance. So I remember that building very well. You have some other images you want to show, Jessica, or do you want to go back? Yeah, that multiple one there. If we go to the lower right, that's St. Peter's Lutheran Church, or a lot of people called it the German Lutheran Church, which was totally destroyed and replaced by the present structure. And Jessica's got the German Lutheran Church on the left side there. The downed tree and the grass is part of Gorman Park, and the street between Gorman Park and the church is South Fifth Street, just a little bit south of the intersection with Grace Street. And this looks like the present church on the right there. Okay, now one of the things that really impressed me when I came into St. Peter early on the Monday morning after the tornado, when we finally got a chance to get down to Minnesota Avenue, was the absence of the spire on the courthouse. And this slide on the left clearly shows the damage that was done. Talking to people who worked at the courthouse at the time, it was a Sunday when the tornado hit, so offices were not open, which was fortunate because the portion of the tower that was broken off went all the way through, apparently down to the basement of the courthouse. So that could have been pretty horrendous had that happened during working hours. Yeah, Jessica's got a lot of great pictures here.
Sorry, the slideshow got messed up.
Oh, that's all right. And you can see in the restoration, they not only restored the tower to its former appearance, but they removed that dreadful entryway that was very controversial for as long as it stood. I think it looks much better without that very modernistic entryway on there.
And like today, so when we were doing the exhibit, so Doug Kruger he's been the head maintenance guy at the county for the longest time. He happened to actually be in the building that Sunday randomly. He and his family were out and about, and they had stopped somewhere, and for some reason, I don't remember what he said, he stopped at the courthouse with his family, and his wife was like hanging out by the door, and she's like, Doug. And like the tornadoes coming like barreling into town, and so they hid in the basement, and they were extremely lucky that he was there because the pipes burst in the north and west side of the building by the front that you're seeing here under the spire. There was water flooding the entire like if you've been to like the emergency operations center, the EOC, it's the level down below the one you come in at the courthouse. So if you're looking at like those basement windows kind of thing, it's down there. He was lucky he was able to get to the water shutoff. Later, when they brought the inspectors in, if they said that if that water had kept going and they'd had more and it stood for as long as it did, they'd had to take the whole courthouse.
Wow.
It would have just been gone, and it was already unstable. And even though they rebuilt the spire, you still can't go up there. They very rarely will ever go up in there because the stairway and everything is just to this day still so unstable on that end.
I hadn't heard that story. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, Doug did an interview in 2018. He loaned us, he has an analog clock that stopped in the courts when the tornado hit the building. The analog clock stopped, and we had that on display. And so they did I don't remember if it was the Herald or the Free Press did a story on his story because it's such a crazy story, and he was pictured with the clock. They did the interview here, so it was amazing.
Yeah, I want copies of that interview.
We have it. It's here somewhere because we shared it on Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, this is a structure, one of the houses that I did want to mention during this discussion. This is the picture on the left showing the damage, and then this picture on the right looks like a more recent picture after the restoration. The house was built by a man named Schumacher, who had a business on Park Row for many years. And it passed through the hands of the Lauman family and then into the hands of Mark Ahlstrom. And Mark was living in the house when the tornado hit. And after the tornado, Mark had carefully gone outside and collected bits and pieces that had been torn off of the house and arranged them so that he could consider which portions were salvageable to use in the restoration. The problem was that St. Peter was invaded by armies of well-meaning volunteers following the tornado. And the volunteers who showed up at Mark's house thought that all that stuff that Mark had laid out on the lawn was debris to be hauled away. So they picked it all up and hauled it all away. But Mark was able to work with the experts at the Minnesota Historical Society, the preservation people, and coordinate with them on how to restore the house. And as you can see from the picture on the right, or if you just simply drive by or walk by the house, which I frequently do, you can appreciate what a beautiful job they did on the restoration. Now, I've been in the house a few years ago, and when you walk around inside, you can clearly see up in the attic and in the tower and in some areas, the fact that the house went through a restoration. But it is absolutely gorgeous, both inside and outside. And everybody who appreciates beautiful old houses is overjoyed that this one was salvaged and restored.
And a lot of the credit should too go to Goodrich Construction out of Mankato. They worked, Randy Dinsmore and his crew worked really hard on this particular house, and it's one of kind of their showpieces of the restoration work that they do at Goodrich Construction.
Yeah, Randy and his crew have been just wonderful people to work with over the years. They've done a tremendous amount of work, not only at the Historical Society building, but also at the Society's property at the Cox House. They've done beautiful work. You have some other images you want to go over? Okay. Yeah, this is an interesting story here. The building, of course, is the Nicollet Hotel at Minnesota Avenue and Park Row. The hotel was opened around 1873, if I remember correctly. And it was one of the finest hotels in Minnesota at the time. It has a long history as a hotel famous for its dining room. And I remember eating there on occasion, on special occasions. The food was always excellent. Some of the service clubs, like the Rotary and the Lions, met there on a weekly basis for many years. And then over time, it ceased to be a hotel, and there were apartments in the second and third floors, then businesses on the ground floor. When I was a kid, and when it was still a hotel, there was a bar on the lower level facing Minnesota Avenue. And at one point, this building was about to be torn down, and some people who saw the value in preserving structures like this stepped in and managed to save it. And then it went through a second process where it was nearly torn down again, and it was restored again. So we're very fortunate that the building is still standing because the damage was quite extensive in the 1998 tornado. And you can see, if you look at it today, that they did a beautiful job restoring it. This picture shows the north side of the hotel from the parking lot. This hotel was built by an architect named Bassford, who was quite a distinguished architect in the 1870s.
He did a couple of other buildings in town too. I think he did some work on one of the banks. I don't remember if it was the Nicollet County or the First National Bank. And I think he also did something with either the Donahauer House or the courthouse or something too.
Yeah,
we did some of that legwork when we were doing the histories for the National Register stuff this past spring. So there's some info on Facebook about that if anybody wants to learn more about Bassford.
Yeah, I think he did the Donahauer House. That's at Locust and Minnesota Avenue on the northwest corner. As far as the banks, it wouldn't have been the First National. And the Nicollet County Bank went up around 1883 or thereabouts, maybe 1885. I don't remember the architect. This is interesting. We saw the Schumacher, Laumann, Alstrom house photos just a few minutes ago. These are the two Schumacher buildings side by side. And the picture on the left was taken right after the 1998 tornado. The picture on the right is a more recent picture. And the picture on the right showing the building with the green trim on the ground level, that building is missing the upper floor that existed prior to the 1998 tornado. If you want to see what the two buildings looked like when they were new back in the 1800s, we do have a picture of them in our collection. And I think we probably have a picture of that building or those two buildings on Minnesota Reflections as well.
Ruth, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, one of my then and nows, I guess from maybe 2 weeks ago was for these buildings. So if you scroll back in your feed a little bit, you should be able to find it.
They'll show up in photos too, and it'll take you to the post. So the before, the then and now situation. So we've got the one, the photo that Ruth loves from Reflections. It's got the puppy dog in front of it. So you can see when the building was new. And then she actually went out in the snow and took a photo that's very recent that they're juxtaposed to each other on Facebook. So if you get a chance every Friday afternoon, she posts a then and now. Take a look at this past week's here. She's got a really cool setup from Ruth Klossner. And before that, it was the Bernadette Church. And then before that was this one. So,
right.
Good stuff.
Yeah. And next week will be Lincoln School this week.
Ooh.
In architecture. Ooh.
Yeah, this picture that Jessica has now, the Chestnut Tree Cafe. This was a popular place back, probably the 1970s, I would guess. I was living in Rochester at the time, and I never really got in here. But I do remember a lot of people talking very favorably about the Chestnut Tree Cafe. You can see the part of this large structure here, which comprises the old Kunzbrook Hotel complex. To the left, you've got the Redmond Club. So this will give you an idea where this is. We're looking at a site just west of the current St. Peter fire station across from South 3rd Street.
Well, this is Tom Gravlin's was his business during that time. And then his house got completely blown away. I think he pretty much, whatever is built, he built it pretty much by himself up on North 3rd. And you know the house?
Is that wooden structure?
Yeah, it's wooden. Yeah, he didn't quite get it done, but he really did a beautiful job. More, until he ran out of steam, ran out of money.
I'm just fond of this photo because of the Twister game that's playfully placed in the broken window.
Yeah, very appropriate.
Let's look at another house. Miles Johnson house, right, Bob?
The which house?
This is the Miles Johnson house, isn't it?
I think you're probably right. I've forgotten exactly where Miles lived. But
I think Eileen labeled this one this was on the before and after wall that we did in the exhibit, and I think she labeled this one Miles Johnson.
That would not surprise me. Miles Johnson was involved with the large Johnson and Company that existed in St. Peter for many years. Their building is on the southwest corner of the intersection of Minnesota and Broadway. And this particular house has an interesting history to it. At one time, this house was a hospital. There was a guy named Field that operated a hospital out of this house back in the early years of the 20th century.
So it was a field hospital, Bob? Sorry, I couldn't resist the joke.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sounds like a military operation, but that was the field hospital.
He sold his business to Cavell.
Yeah, and then Cavell built a hospital.
I know something. One thing.
Yeah, he added a floor to the Patrick's building. So the Patrick's building that you see today was built by a merchant named Theodore Knoll. And eventually Cavell purchased the building, then added the top floor to it, and then operated the Cavell Hospital out of it for many years. I'm not aware of a connection between Field and Cavell such that Cavell would have had any hospital facilities in this particular house. If that's the case, and that Cavell operated a hospital out of this house for a short time, I would like to know about that, because
a good question for Melanie.
I saw an article about this a couple of weeks ago when I was looking through some stuff, and Cavell bought the business from Field and then started the business in the Knoll building.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me. Yeah, but this is quite an impressive house. As far as I know, the Zaliks are still living there. And
where is this exactly?
This is at the intersection of North 3rd and Swift Street, and be on the southwest corner. I love looking at this house every time I drive by or walk by. And Nancy Zalik, she used to be part of the Brett family. Yeah, the famous Brett's department store on Front Street in Mankato that operated for so many years. So she's quite an interesting lady to talk to. It's a beautiful old house and been beautifully restored.
So if you went to, Ruth, if you went to Olmonson's house that we were talking about and went up, it's just a couple streets west from that.
Yeah, southwest corner of 3rd and Swift. It's exactly one block west of where my grandparents lived for many years along Minnesota Avenue.
And here's that that third level we're talking about that was added on to Patrick's.
Yeah, by Cavell. Yeah.
Let's see. Well, here's the big, this is always, there's the two big stories yet. There's this one.
Yeah. Now, the top picture, obviously, it was taken in 1998. You can see on the left the spire of the chapel, Christ Chapel at Gustavus, was destroyed. And it took them a while to find somebody, find some business that would be willing to undertake the restoration process. And they did manage to find somebody to do it. The restored version is impressive, but the original version didn't have quite the disparity of different colors that are visible in the current spire. The original version was more a single color, and this one that exists now, you can notice some different shades of color in it. But otherwise, they did a beautiful job restoring it. There was other structural damage to the chapel as well, but the building as a whole survived. We're extremely fortunate that Old Main, the big Kasota stone building that went up in 1875 as the first and only building at Gustavus when it arrived in St. Peter in the 1870s. We're extremely fortunate that this building survived. I think it would have taken an awful lot to destroy that thing. It's really solidly built. It's gone through a number of restorations over the years, and currently it's quite beautiful inside and outside. But in the foreground of the top picture, you can see some of the massive amount of debris, largely trees in this particular picture. The Gustavus campus suffered horrendous damage to the vegetation throughout the campus. They lost a gigantic number of trees. The library suffered severe damage. They lost a huge number of books. Fortunately, their archives survived. They have both a religious archive and a more historical type of archive, similar to what the museum has. And both those archives, which were on the top floor of the library, survived. The college also suffered extensive damage, both inside and outside, to the large Lund Arena. If you've seen any of the pictures of the damage showing the interior of the arena, it was a staggeringly complex job to restore the arena. But they did an amazing job, and it's set for a major expansion in the near future.
And they, what was it? We were talking to the, so the Borgeson cabin was up there too at that time. And it picked the roof off of the Borgeson cabin and just set it next to it.
Yeah, the Borgeson cabin came from Lake Prairie Township, just about a mile or a mile and a half north of Scandian Grove Lutheran Church. And it's quite close to the line with Sibley County, close to Highway 8 that runs east-west across Sibley County. And interestingly enough, the Borgesons were neighbors of my great-great-grandparents who lived just to the south of the Borgesons, having arrived in 1857 from Sweden.
Yeah, so here's a picture of the cabin. So the cabin itself was shredded to pieces, but the top was just lifted off and set beside the rubble.
Yeah, and if you've been by the cabin as it appears today, or if you've been inside the restored cabin, you'd never know that there had been any damage to it.
So there's a set of photos here from Gustavus that was, we had the Twist of Fate program for the 20th anniversary. This was the set of Paul Ossen's photos that we did for the slideshow that includes a bunch of Gustavus shots.
Yeah, that's the Euler dormitory.
You can see the trees. So the statistic eludes me at the moment, but it was 2,000 trees. It was over 2,000 trees that were lost. And I'm assuming that was across town and not just on Gustavus.
Gustavus lost a gigantic number. And from memory, I can't tell you what it was.
I know it's one of them is 2,000. It was because that was one of the big statistics that stuck out.
I'm guessing that was probably just for Gustavus.
It could be if you look at this photo.
Yeah, because the city as a whole lost, I'm sure, well over 2,000. We lost 2 large hackberry trees in our front yard. This picture is quite interesting. You can see Old Main just to the right of the top center. Then you can see the chapel immediately left of center at the top. And then going a little bit diagonally toward the left, but diagonally, you'll see a dormitory with kind of a greenish roof and kind of brownish walls. That was Johnson Hall, named in honor of the late Governor Johnson from St. Peter, who died in office in 1909. And the idea after the tornado was that they were hoping to save buildings like this, but they decided that they just couldn't preserve that one. So it was torn down after the tornado. And I don't believe there's anything on the site currently.
No, that building was pretty wrecked when after the tornado came through. There was kind of no saving, and I don't know that there's anything there. Someone who's maybe more familiar with campus might be able to answer that, but I can share a photo that we have of what happened to Johnson Hall.
Yeah, you can see the damage was pretty extensive, and it's a similar situation to the 2 schools that we talked about earlier. After the tornado, there was talk of trying to preserve the oldest school, the 1870s school, because it had been so beautifully restored prior to the tornado and had been used by the arts and heritage people. But I remember when I first saw it the morning after the tornado, that was a real blow. That really hurt. And it was just too far gone. Now, I know Barb Olmanson and a couple other people, against orders from officials, did go inside the school and salvage some items that were in one of the rooms in the old school. The historical, the Historical Society had been using a room on the main floor in the northeast corner of the building for exhibiting things like old high school diplomas and a few other period pieces. And Barb and the other women managed to salvage a few items, but it was so dangerous being inside the building because they were afraid that the debris might continue to settle and land on top of them. So they were
And
limited
it's
what they could haul out.
they've managed, the art center has a really cool piece of, they've got one of the windows, one of the curved windows. They have that in their collection at the Art Center of St. Peter does, which is kind of neat. They keep that as a reminder because that's kind of where they came out of, which was kind of a neat piece. But Don Glimsdahl did a lot to try to save what they could from that building. He was the one who tried to save the bell. He was the maintenance guy at those sites, and yeah, that was a big to do when that building came down, and it was unfortunate. They had tried to get funds to repair the building, and it was unfortunate because it was just a slight mix up in paper and how things were filed that building ended up being torn down. There's a story on that we had finally dug out for the exhibit, and that one stung too because that building was salvageable, and it wasn't. It was torn down. And of course we have two beautiful buildings that are part of, we've got the community center library and we've got the Central Square apartments from that sort of center part of town, but it would have been nice to keep that 1870 school.
I can't begin to imagine how they would have gone about restoring that school. The damage was so horrendous that I find it quite amazing that they could seriously consider the possibility of restoring it. I did save 2 bricks from it, which I still have.
So we're coming up on time here. We did get going a couple minutes late. Peggy, Kate, Ron, Ruth, questions, comments, anything that you'd like to add, say? I know we kind of just got to the history nerds here, kind of just got to talking, but that's kind of what we do.
I was interested in this page that you've got here, Jessica. The bottom center, David Meserly submitted a little statement, and he talks about his sister trying to get through. His sister was in my high school class. And I know where the Meserly home was. That was down by the outdoor swimming pool. It would be on the, it'd be on the northeast corner of the intersection of Madison and 4th. No, Chatham and 4th.
Adam.
Yeah, northeast corner of Chatham and 4th.
I always enjoy an opportunity to talk to people about what the tornado, how it hit them, where we were, because like I said earlier, I think we were all kind of totally immersed in trying to get through whatever part of our lives we had. And I still hear stories from people that I had no clue. Opportunities don't exist that much for us to talk about it. So I do really appreciate this.
And I think that piggybacking off of that too, as well documented as this particular weather event is, I mean, there's still so much of the story that we don't have documented. We spent a lot of time and energy leading up to the 2018 anniversary, building our collection and gaining stories, and the events we did too, we did a Tell Me a Story event, and Todd Prafke telling his stories, and Bruce telling his stories, and others. I mean, we have some of it, but even other business stories. I mean, a lot of the business stories we don't have. We're sorely missing a lot of the first person accounts, the personal histories, and I think it's still, even though it's been more than 20 years, it's hard for everybody to remember this. I mean, when we were talking about doing an exhibit, people were either really eager to go through this process because it was cathartic, or we were immediately shut down because it was still, after all that time, it was still too painful to talk about. And so I think that even though this is probably the most well documented weather event in our collection, it's still nowhere near complete, which is, you know, the point of doing events like this, so that we can get stories and we can get people talking. And, you know, the Bruce Davis, when he stopped in, he dropped off his recordings, and then he randomly came back and he's like, hey, by the way, do you guys want the banner that was, you know, across 169 thanking everybody for their volunteer work? And we're like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, yeah, sure. So, you know, it's in my garage. I'll grab that and I'll bring it down. And so we had it displayed in the lobby. We got up on ladders and we hung it from the ceiling, and because they did a new banner. And so we had both banners on display at the same time, the new and the old, and we have both, which is awesome. But it's still like, after 20 years, he's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I got that in my garage. You know, do you want it? Sure, absolutely. That's a big piece of what people saw when they finally came through town. So, I mean, if someone didn't know what was going on or what had happened for some reason, you still had that trigger for someone from outside of town. So something like that, along with what you're seeing on the screen, like, these are all from people who experienced it from both close and far away. So I think that events like this are good.
I was kind of looking through my photo album from the tornado, and as I remember correctly, when I got my photos developed, we always got double prints. So I'm thinking I have those double prints somewhere, and the Historical Society would be a good place to donate those. In fact, I was just looking through it, and I remember, you know, I took a picture of the neighbor's farm. They lit it on fire. You know, there was nothing left. I suppose they had salvaged as much as they could. And, you know, we were out cleaning up around my place, and we look over and here's this big house on fire, you know, and it was like, woo, you know, so a lot of reminders, but all in all good at this point. Thank you.
We're always encouraging people to share images with us. If we can't get people to donate their images, we like to borrow them and make digital copies of them. And what we've done in the past is we've usually sent digital copies along with the people when they come to pick up their original photographs. So it's helped us build our collection considerably. But the other thing is, I still encourage people not only to share or donate images, but I encourage them to put something on paper and bring us a copy so that we can add it to our files at the museum. I know I have my mother's handwritten account of what she went through during the tornado. And I've encouraged other people to write their accounts as well and add them to our files at the museum.
And that's another piece too. Your house was relatively undamaged and the house next door is gone, you know?
Yeah. I walked with the insurance man all the way around our house, and he looked at the side of the house where we started, and he says, well, we'll replace that side. And then we walked to another side. He said, well, we'll replace that side. Then we walked to a third side. He said, well, we'll replace that side. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just do the whole four sides. And so we got all new sidings all the way around our house. Plus we had roof damage, and we had other damage as well. But ours was nothing compared to what Jessica mentioned. Bill and Delia Hain lived immediately north of us, and they were elderly people at the time, but they were unable to make it to the basement. So they rode out the tornado on the ground level, and that house did not have a second floor like our house has. I've got rooms on the upper floor here, but Bill and Delia didn't have an upper floor. Well, the tornado took off the roof and peeled away the entire west wall, which was the long side of the house. The south and north sides were the narrow sides of the house. So anybody driving by on North Washington at Evanston could look right into Bill and Delia's house and see the entire interior, just like you would looking into a dollhouse. But they survived. They were kind of beat up, but they survived. Then immediately to the south of us, there had been a large concrete block garage, 3 stalls and quite tall. And I never saw any of those blocks. I don't know where they wound up, except the ones that were at the very lowest level. So you had the concrete floor and then an outline of a single layer of blocks showing where the garage building had been. And like I say, we never saw any of the other blocks anywhere. So I have no idea how far the tornado carried them, but it had to be a long ways. And I should also mention that there had been a popular picnic area for many years just across the highway from the Historical Society building and north a bit along Old Minnesota Avenue. A cabin had been found about 1930 out by Oak Leaf Lake. And the cabin had been built by some of the early pioneers in the 1800s. And it was decided to preserve the cabin, but move it to a wayside rest along Old Minnesota Avenue. And as I mentioned, that had been a very popular picnic site. Kids like me and others would play inside the cabin, and we'd have our picnics outside at picnic tables. That cabin had been moved to the fairgrounds a few years prior to the 1998 tornado to preserve it. And unfortunately, it probably would have lasted longer had it remained at the wayside rest, because the tornado came along and picked it up and dropped it about a block away in countless pieces in the backyard of a neighbor of a gentleman that I talked to who told me the story. And that was a real loss for a lot of us from my generation who had very fond memories of that particular cabin.
We had one question, and I am looking for the photo right now. I don't remember what folder I saw it in, but I do know I have one of a Lumacraft.
Yeah, Lumacraft got hit, scattered bullets all over the place.
Here we go. Pulling up a Lumacraft. And let me share this. There's a Lumacraft.
Yeah, you can see quite a mess there. The street running across the top of the photo would be St. Julian. And the building at the top of the photo to the right of center, and the larger of the two buildings on the top there was Mike's Auto Body Shop. And then, of course, Lumacraft dominates essentially the rest of the photo there, but you can see a lot of their canoes wound up all over the place, and that was a real mess.
Then that's the auto body shop.
Yeah, that's Mike's.
A lot of these photos came from Trudy Olmondson.
Yeah.
There's a whole slew through here. You see some of the boats.
Yeah. See, Trudy lives down by Hallis Pond there.
Yep.
So
These are a couple of these are taken from her property.
yeah. That one looks like it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in yards. they're all over.
Yeah.
They were picking boats out of trees.
Yeah. Mike's Body Shop was just north of Trudy, and the Lumacraft was right across St. Julian from Trudy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Yep.
Peggy.
Good.
Please join us on the 12th of April. We'll have another one of these at 10 a.m. and it's going to be on Nicollet County floods.
That should be particularly
It'll be a good